So companies go bankrupt all the time. It's perfectly fine. But in the case of the banks, if a bank goes bankrupt, it's likely that a lot of other banks will go back, or it's possible, depending on what precipitated the bankruptcy. But if it's a housing crash, many banks will go bankrupt at once. And if that happens, there's a cost to the economy which is beyond the cost to the individual shareholders and managers of the firms. And an externality, a negative externality, is a standard ground for regulation that conservative economists will generally accept. So, now let's talk about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. There's almost something paranoid about the significance that Mr. Wallison attaches to these disreputable companies, and I don't understand the logic by which reckless practices by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac somehow infect the rest of the market. So suppose it's the case that the legitimate banks, the real banks, are making mortgage loans, very risky mortgage loans for reasons I gave, but maybe for his reason. Right? They're making risky mortgage loans. They're packaging them in these bonds, these mortgage-backed bonds that we call mortgage-backed securities, and then they're selling them, at a nice price to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Well, how on earth could that endanger the banking industry, right? Once you've sold it to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, they have the risk. When the collapse comes, they go broke. If Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae go broke, that's expensive, but that's not the end of the world. Countrywide, now he disparaged Countrywide. Countrywide is a legit, it's a capitalist private company, not part of government. It was the biggest mortgage bank in the United States until it started to disintegrate in 2007. It originated very risky mortgages because there was a market for very risky mortgages. So it originated them, and it blew up. But it was nothing to do with Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. As I say, if you have some irresponsible organization that buys up securities backed by really crummy mortgages, that's terrific. You lay off all the risk on them. And so I just don't understand how they could... I don't really even see the difference between the business policies followed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and all the Washington Mutual. Have you read about Washington Mutual? It was very aggressive in pushing these subprime and Alt-A mortgages, 100%, no interest for 2 years, all that stuff on people on the West Coast. And I don't blame Washington Mutual as long as they were not engaged in fraud. You want to tell people, take a risk, prices are rising, get an equity in your house if the price rises the way it's been doing. I don't object to that. I don't see any difference between that kind of risky business behavior and what Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae do. And then also, where is the Fed in all this? Because Mr. Wallison admits, the legitimacy of a central bank. So here's Alan Greenspan, who has a tremendous reputation, and Ben Bernanke, who is the leading economist student of the Great Depression, where there was a big bank collapse. Where are they when all this risky lending is going on and the banks are, maybe through machinations of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and Barney Frank and so on, are getting themselves into this deep trouble? Where's the Fed? Why doesn't the Fed? Now, one of the very bad things Greenspan did, and central bankers should be seen and not heard. I shouldn't say anything. But he said in the early 2000s, if we raise interest rates, we will do so gradually. And so, of course, the bankers and everybody said, well, great, be gradual. Interest rates are very low. They may move up a little, but it's going to be slow. So, we're still going to, as, Mr. Prince, the chairman of the Citigroup, said, we know it's musical chairs, but but while in fact, Warren Buffett put it very well, because he's a genuine wit. So what he said was, well, it's like Cinderella at the ball. You're dancing and you're having a great time, it's terrific. You know that at midnight, you're going to turn into a pumpkin or something like that, but you're going to leave before midnight. You'll leave at 2 minutes to midnight. But there are no clocks on the wall. So that was the problem.
All right, Judge, I'm going to give you 2 more minutes because
I only need 1 minute.
And then we want to know there's going to be a ton of questions, so I want to get to the
no, I'm going to take less than 2 minutes.
Okay.
Because, as I say, where is the central bank? If you have this tremendous bubble and these completely irresponsible companies, why doesn't the central bank say, okay, it's midnight now, we're raising interest rates? Now, of course, eventually it did, but it was too late. The bubble was too big when it burst. You have a depression. So,
all right, now Peter, you have 10 seconds. Okay. So we want to get to the questions in the audience, and people are doing a 7th inning stretch. So yeah, there's some uppercuts being in some rounds.
First of all, can you hear me? I'm now not lavalier. So I'll try to use this. I can't answer everything, but I guess I wasn't clear enough. So I won't go through the whole thing again. But my point was simply that the government required Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the banks to make terrible loans. Some of those loans were kept by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, $1.6 trillion worth. Another $2.4 trillion worth are out there. They're out there on the balance sheets of banks and other financial institutions all over the world. And as those things decline in value, so do those financial institutions. And that's why we have a worldwide crisis.
And Peter, it's also that they operated with the implicit guarantee of the U.S. taxpayer backing their operations.
Well, that's how they got all the money that they wanted to buy the mortgages, absolutely. That was one of the problems. Now, that raises a question of what Judge Posner said about regulation. Of course, regulation is necessary when institutions are backed by the government, because there isn't any market discipline in that case. So obviously you have to have regulation. Now, regulation is not effective, as we know, because look at the banking system, which is heavily regulated. And it is in a catastrophic condition, but we have no choice. Incidentally, we don't guarantee their capital. We guarantee deposits up to $250,000. So it's an important difference. If you've got a deposit larger than $250,000, then your deposit is at risk. But in any event, they have to be regulated because we have no other way to control their risk-taking when there are groups of people who don't care about their risk-taking because they will be paid off even if the bank fails. And in fact, banks fail all the time. This year, there have been 24 bank failures. Not the biggest banks, not the ones you hear about, Bank of America, Citibank, and so forth, but banks all over the country, 24. And as I indicated, back in the 90s, we had 1,600 bank failures, along with the complete collapse of the S&L industry, all of which had been heavily regulated before they failed. Fannie and Freddie should have been heavily regulated, not because I like regulation or admit that there should be regulation. I'm just saying that they are backed by the government. It was clear they were backed by the government, and therefore they had to be regulated. And they were not effectively regulated until new legislation was passed in July of 2008.
All right, so we're going to get to questions quickly, as soon as possible, but the judge made a point that, it's a great business model. You get to offload risk onto Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Now we have a Treasury official coming out with a report that I just read today.